When will the Dragonsteel amusement park be built? Someone asks. The audience hoots. Whenever you say hoots, it's condescending. If it's world building, it's only world building one thing. The world builder's world. Okay. I mean, he's making money, and then he's using the money to expand what all the people love, and then more people love it, and then they keep buying the books and enjoying the stories, and then expand it more. Also, he can create this structure of incredible story experience and engagement, and he's clearly a guy who loves to write. I mean, he spends all his time writing. He puts out books constantly. It's not like is Brandon Sanderson becoming corrupted and turning into a hedonistic tyrant. I don't understand. I don't understand. This is people choosing voluntarily to celebrate this world and this thing. Are they being tricked? If they're being tricked, explain how. Explain what in the culture of Sandersonian fans we need to realize. 3 days later, I pull up to Sanderson's built world, his homes. So I woke up this morning and I saw this article on Brandon Sanderson from Wired, and it's a bit bizarre. I think it's going a bit viral, at least in my sphere. And it's a bit bizarre. It's a bit of a strange article. I hope I'm not just adding to the noise by reacting to it or giving my thoughts, but it's kind of strange, and I do really love Sanderson. I wouldn't say I'm like a die-hard fan. Actually, I'm not much of a reader at all these days. Like, I grew up reading fantasy sci-fi. I am a writer. I want to become an author in my own name. So that's sort of what I'm doing over here. Move to Indonesia, work less for money, and work on some of my own projects. This YouTube channel. Subscribe. Check out the House of the Dragon video if you haven't. But I think in the last several years of travel and working on my own stuff, I've written a lot, I've read a lot, I've contemplated a lot regarding storytelling, and I haven't actually been reading as much. So I'm a lifelong fantasy sci-fi guy. I've read all of Sanderson's main stuff. I think I also read Edge Dancer, if that's not considered main. So Mistborn, Wax and Wane, Stormlight Archives, Elantris, Warbreaker, what else? End of Wheel of Time, obviously. And I really like him. I think he has issues with all the things people commonly say he has issues with. His prose can be a bit simplistic, repetitive. You can tell sometimes his mind just kind of falls into the same groove as far as describing certain things, certain characters associated with certain actions or gestures or facial expressions, certain cities or scenes or worlds or beasts, described often sometimes with the exact same words, like sentence. Well, I think there's a few cases where I've seen actual sentence for sentence repetition. But yeah, so those things, it feels like, he's a guy who wants to write and he wants to get through the story and he wants to put out and he wants to explore and see where the mind, the journey, the Cosmere takes him, and the prose itself isn't so much isn't as meaningful for him, probably. Also, he reaches a very, very broad audience with his prose, and I think that's amazing. And he's definitely become more of a name, I think, even outside the fantasy sort of whatever sphere. I think, I can't speak to this super confidently. I know he obviously made quite a few headlines with his Kickstarter, which was record-breaking. And I think he's sort of grown to appeal to a slightly broader audience than most fantasy authors. He might not be on the same level of renown as like George R. R. Martin because of the show, HBO. Who else? Tolkien, obviously. Margaret Atwood. Neil Gaiman. But for different reasons. And as far as his success, and this was the strange thing about this article, because, let's see. Sanderson article, Wired. So yeah, I can't speak with unshakable confidence about him as a person and all this stuff that other people probably do know more. But I've listened to some of his lectures. I've listened to him speak a bit on various things. I've read his books. And this article is just, it's bizarre. Like, the thing is, it doesn't seem to have a point. It seems just kind of like pointless, petty jabbing without any clear... Most of the times, if you write an article which speaks negatively about someone, let's say, or with a less than favorable view, if you write not to mention like a hit piece, there's supposed to be some sort of point. Like, you're supposed to be commenting on the culture at large. You're supposed to be commenting on, oh, this fan base gravitates towards these ideas because of these various poor characteristics of this person, and that's reflected here, and that's why, as a culture, as a society, we need to pay attention to this, and blah blah blah. Or at least you write you write because you're interested. Like, that's the thing. This article just didn't even seem I'm not sure who the author is. Someone named Jason. Jason Kehe? Kehe. Um, and I don't want to, I don't want to bash him too much. I don't want to be, whatever, jumping on the bandwagon of defending in some sort of mobbish, tribalistic way. Maybe he's genuine about it all. I saw Sanderson was very charitable on his Reddit. Let's see. On his Reddit, he was saying things like, Jason's clearly exploring truth in life through writing in the same way that Sanderson himself does. What did he say? Blah, 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 blah. He also feels sincere in his attempt to try to understand, while he legitimately seems to dislike me and my writing. I don't think that's why he came to see me. He wasn't looking for a hit piece. He was looking to explore the world through his writing. In that, he and I are the same, and I respect him for it. Even if much of his tone seems quite dismissive of many people and ideas I care deeply about. The strangest part for me is how Jason says he had trouble finding the real me. He said he wants something true or genuine. Okay, and on and on and on. But the first part here, I get that Jason felt incredibly conflicted about the fact that he finds me lame and boring. I'm baffled how he seems to find every single person on his trip, blah, 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 to be worthy of derision. But it was sincere. So he felt incredibly conflicted, sincere. He is seeking life through writing, whatever that was. And please leave him alone. He seems to be a sincere man who tried very hard to find a story, discovered that there wasn't one that interested him, and then floundered in trying to figure out what he could say to make deadline. I respect him for trying his best to write what he obviously found a difficult article. I don't think I'd gotten to that part in Sanderson's. And it is... I think it's very charitable. I think it's very charitable, but it is hard to make judgments from such a distanced perspective, and there's this sort of mobbish, viral Twitter modern mentality to jump on things and extremify things, and that tends to get more clicks and views and everything. Everyone sort of has the sense that everyone else in the world, because we're so consciously aware of the narratives we hear from all these people in the digital realm, and yet the people we know personally, that we see face to face, that we interact with, that's such a small core unit that, might hopefully form the basis, the structure for our lives and identities and self-esteem and whatnot. But it is extremely powerful, because the things we hear from these impersonal digital sources, they are ideas, and they do have potency. And I would say they have just as much I don't know psychologically how it works, but they have a lot of potency. And even though it's divorced from a sort of personal connection and empathy and understanding how or why someone's doing that thing, because it's divorced from that personal element, you tend to focus just on the ideas, blah, blah, blah. I'm saying things about social media that we all know, and I'm not psychologically articulate. I'm not articulate enough regarding the psychology to explain it better. So you know what I'm saying. So I don't want to do that. I don't want to just sort of bandwagon. I'm not intending to attack him in particular, I suppose. I just didn't get the same vibe of sincerity or, genuinely being conflicted writing this article that Sanderson is suggesting he felt in the article. And we'll go through it. It doesn't seem to me to have a point. It doesn't seem... Perhaps what he said there at the end is indeed the answer. He discovered there wasn't a story that interested him, then floundered in trying to figure out what he could say to make deadline. Perhaps, but it's difficult to say even from the beginning, the whole framing of the piece. It's difficult to say what his purpose or interest was. I don't know this writer, so I don't know what he typically writes about. I don't know if he's interested in fantasy and sci-fi in general. He did make one comment, which I appreciate, regarding the typical snobbery, whatever, directed towards fantasy and sci-fi speculative fiction in the literary world. So maybe it's sort of his thing, and maybe he went to speak to Sanderson hoping to figure something out, hoping to capture the momentum or spearhead of the movement, or as it's evolving from classical to modern. And maybe he was trying to do something insightful. Maybe he was trying to figure out what's going on exactly with this hyper-successful Sanderson guy. But from the very beginning, it just seemed kind of negative. It didn't seem like an exploratory, genuine attitude he took. So we'll see. Let's see. I think that's enough intro. Blah, 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 blah. Okay. Most years, Sanderson makes about 10 million. Last year, he made 55 million. This is obviously a lot of money for anyone. For a writer of young adultish, never-ending, speed-written fantasy books, it's huge. I suppose so. you might say that that's the sort of fantasy which is going to make the most money. Well, that sentence doesn't seem particularly offensive or doesn't seem aimed at any sort of jab. I don't know. Sorry, I kind of lost my train of thought there. Young adultish, never-ending speedruns in fantasy books. It's huge. Yeah, you could say those are the most lucrative, probably, going to be young adultish. Then with this kind of broadening into more adult, I think, serious philosophical themes, but enough young adultish simplicity in terms of probably colorful world and characters and pace that, yeah. I do think there's a big problem with bloating, especially in like the last two Stormlight books. It's been a long time since I read anything else besides Stormlight, but I think I've read each Stormlight book probably 2 or 3 times, except for Rhythm of War and Oathbringer. I might have only read once. Okay, by Sanderson's estimation, he's the highest-selling author of epic fantasy in the world. On the day of his record-breaking Kickstarter campaign, 42 million of that 55 million. Wow, that's amazing. I came to the Wired offices ready to gossip. How'd he do it? Why now? Is Brandon Sanderson even a good writer? So I feel like we do need more framing. Who is this guy? Why is he aware of Brandon Sanderson? Well, obviously the record breaking. But why is he interested particularly? Nobody had the first clue who or what I was talking about. On the one hand, again, not extremely surprising. They probably just walk different circles. I do think Sanderson has become a bit more famous more broadly, but that was probably the beginning of it, or maybe that was an increase. On the one hand, who cares? Sanderson has millions upon millions of fans all over the planet. It doesn't matter that some losers at a single magazine, even if it is one of the nerdier ones, had never heard of him. On the other hand, the ignorance goes far beyond Wired. As far as I can tell, Sanderson, who has been topping bestseller lists for the better part of the 21st century, has not been written about in any depth by any major publication ever. I don't know if that's true. That doesn't feel true, especially not since the Kickstarter. Is this sort of his mentality upon response to the day of the Kickstarter? I call his publicist to confirm this. Well, we have a piece coming up in LDS Living, he told me. That's LDS as in Latter-day Saints. It's a magazine for Mormons. Again, yeah, I mean, starting to get a bit derisive without any clear purpose. Doesn't feel connected to any sort of value judgment or observation regarding why things should be any different. It just seems kind of like derisive. But it'll get worse. It'll get worse. Which makes sense. Sanderson is extremely Mormon. I don't know if extremely is the right way to categorize it. I mean, this is the thing. This is the thing about this article. I'll talk about it more later, but you're not going to catch up to the decades of production, the thousands and thousands and thousands of pages, the I don't know how many hours of lectures, all the fans, millions of fans across the world who all have paid attention to this man, read his stories, dived into his philosophy and his thought and how he approaches trauma and suffering and God and good and even all the big questions of life and sacrifice. You're not going to convince them in a single article. You're not going to convince them. First of all, probably you're not going to convince them that you're familiar with the work and the author, but you're not going to convince them that their experience was somehow more shallow or more Mormon, more extremist, more this, more that, more whatever, an illusion. So I don't know if extremely Mormon is the right way to categorize him, because I think he seems to have a strong faith. He seems to have decided to believe it through intentional philosophical speculation and, coming to the conclusions of his faith through faith, but also through rational thought. And I've listened to a few lectures. I don't remember which one it was, but he was talking about how he always appreciates when atheistic writers portray religious people as intelligent and religion as complex, and how they kind of understand and appreciate the deeply embedded sort of way it's built our society and our civilization and our psychology even. And the most interesting sorts of stories take a respectful, complicated, sophisticated view of religion or of atheism. And he was saying, there's this tendency to denigrate religious people as dumb in some books, and it sort of just diminishes the entire appeal of the story. And then he was saying he tries to avoid the same with atheism, so he tries to write complex atheists, which I appreciated. I've gone on a long personal journey myself regarding spiritual beliefs. That's actually sort of what the other part of this channel's about. For those of you who are new, which it's a new channel, um, I will be publishing a lot of philosophy content probably, as well as storytelling, analysis, film, book, movie, whatever, reviews. And so yeah, I hope that's not a bother. I'm considering starting 2 channels, but I don't really know at what point people usually do that. Drop a comment if you have any thoughts. But yeah, philosophy. So I've been on my own spiritual journey. It's led me to a lot of philosophical thought, and I really appreciate when you can tell someone else has done the same. So he builds all these worlds which would be considered pagan, or they're definitely not Mormon, they're definitely not Christian, they're definitely not even really monotheistic worlds in the actual structure of the story. They might reflect a lot of his same values or conclusions, but he sort of builds up these entities of ideas and beliefs and convictions, worldviews, and then he throws them at each other. And that's what good storytelling is. That's what a compelling villain does, is he constructs a believable, complex, compelling worldview, and then sets it against your protagonist, and then you see what happens. And oftentimes, if the villain is going on a journey or growing in his own way, and if you can kind of relate or empathize with that, then he becomes less of a villain and more just another character. And that's what Martin does so well in Game of Thrones. That's what Sanderson does so well. That's what modern fantasy is doing more and more. And even Robert Jordan was doing that quite a bit. So that's what you do. You construct. You push yourself into a different worldview. You try to transcend the limits of your individual self. You try to understand things from another perspective. And obviously, and then how would I see the world if this was what I believed, or how would I see this conflict if this was what I believed? If this was my genuine, why do people have this genuine goal? And then you try to really put yourself in that until you can actually write someone motivated by the same things, drawing the same conclusions, da 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 da. And that's what makes a good character. And I think Sanderson does that beautifully, not only in the characters, but in the world building in terms of gods and forces, good and evil, symbolism. And this is something that a sophisticated thinker does. I don't think it's extremely Mormon in the sense that this article is trying to convey, unless by extremely Mormon he means to make a compliment, like he's thought through it intensely and he believes in a very rigorous, sophisticated, full-bodied way, developed way, full-bodied. It's like a wine. What makes less sense is why there's a hole the size of Utah where the man's literary reputation should be. Is it because he mostly writes fantasy? So the snob sneer. So nice. Is it because he mostly writes fantasy? So the snob sneer sub-literary genre? But then, so do J.K. Rowling, Margaret Atwood, that's another one. Rowling, I forgot. Rowling? And George R.R. Martin, and their household names. Is it because none of Sanderson's work has been adapted for the screen? Well, he wrote 3 of the Wheel of Time books, and an adaptation of that series came out on Amazon Prime in 2021. Could it be, finally, because he's a weirdo Mormon? But so are Orson Scott Card, Glenn A. Larson, and Stephanie Meyer. I did not know that about Stephanie Meyer. Well, I never really put much thought into Twilight, I suppose. Mormon, I mean. Only Orson Scott Card is also a weirdo. So I think that's sort of going to be the conclusion of the piece. As we read on, we will see he sort of starts to hone in on the Mormonism, on a couple other strange things, and I don't think he ever really draws a clear conclusion. I don't think he ever actually makes a point, but here I guess he's suggesting that it's a sort of mystery as to why Sanderson isn't extremely discussed or well known in the world at large. And this is true, obviously, compared to George R.R. Martin, but I think there's an obvious reason for all of these things. Margaret Atwood was very prominent and controversial, what's the word? For various reasons. George R.R. Martin, HBO, huge show. George R.R. Martin's books grew very slowly. I think the first one was published in 96. Game of Thrones, 96. And I think they grew in popularity very slowly, as some books do. Where am I? I've never done this before, unscripted. It's because he wrote 3 of the Wheel of Time books. Well, Wheel of Time hasn't been in the public awareness nearly as much as Game of Thrones since the show, and that's for obvious reasons. The Wheel of Time, as it currently is a terrible show with terrible legacy, and it is only at the beginning. and I don't think many people probably associate with Sanderson. Also, Robert Jordan's already passed on, unfortunately, and the series is finished. And, there were many reasons to start paying attention to George R. R. Martin more. He's already making new shows and blah, 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 blah. So, I just don't really get it. I don't really get it. So he's saying it can't be because would it be because of Screen? No. Would it be because of he writes fantasy? Well, blah, 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 blah. And he's leading to the Mormonism. That's why he's not known, apparently. Sanderson, when I eventually meet him in person, makes versions of these excuses, plus others, for his writerly obscurity. So he meets him in person. Sanderson, when I eventually meet him in person, makes versions of these excuses, plus others, for his writerly obscurity. It's kind of fun to talk about, until it isn't. And that's when I realize, in a panic, that I now have a problem. Sanderson is excited to talk about his reputation. He's excited, really, to talk about anything. But none of his self-analysis is, for my purposes, exciting. In fact, at that first dinner, over a Flopsy Utah Chinese, this being days before I'd meet his extended family and attend his fan convention and take his son to a theme park and cry in his basement. Good hooks there, okay. I find Sanderson depressingly, story-killingly lame. I don't get a feeling of conflictedness from this. I still don't really understand exactly why he went there to talk to Sanderson. I don't really understand what his connection is to fantasy. But I suppose we're supposed to take that on faith. That's fine. Probably that's how most articles start, and it's only an article, and now he's sort of getting into the meat of it. So it's kind of fun to talk about it till it isn't, and that's when I realize in a panic that I now have a problem. Yeah, it doesn't seem earnest. He's just saying Sanderson's talkative, likable, personable. Sanderson agreed to meet with a journalist and is happy to talk about everything. That's nice. What does he mean? For my purposes, his self-analysis isn't exciting. For my purposes, what are your purposes? Your purposes are to reach what sort of conclusion regarding Sanderson's success or the literary world? I just don't understand. It's just kind of, it seems just like a bunch of petty jabs just to make someone seem less impressive. I really don't get it. He sits across from me in an empty restaurant, kind of lordly and sure of his insights. Okay, this is getting extremely clear and overt with the derision, demeaning, whatever. In a graphic t-shirt and an ill-fitting blazer, which he says he wears because it makes him look professorial, sorry. I would like to have seen that comment. I'm sure it was made in humor or in another sort of way. It doesn't. He isn't. Okay. Yes, very earnest. Very good-hearted. Unless the word means only believing everything you say is worth saying. Well, it seemed like he was happy to talk about anything. He probably just finds conversation enjoyable and pleasant. And I don't know, I wasn't there, so I wonder what on the other end of the conversation this Jason was saying. I began to think, this is what I drove all the way from San Francisco to the suburbs of Salt Lake City in the freezing cold dead of winter for? For previously frozen dim sum and freeze-dried conversation? Okay, so insulting where he lives. This must be why nobody writes about Brandon Sanderson. That is probably why. Frozen dim sum and freeze-dried conversation. There are not millions of people across the world who would be delighted at a chance to talk to him, who haven't met him and haven't said he's fantastic and generous and hospitable and always friendly and likable. So recklessly I say what's on my mind. I have to. His wife is there, his biggest fan, always his first reader, making polite comments. I don't care. I'm utterly confused as to the purpose of this paragraph. Maybe nobody writes about you, I say to Sanderson, because you don't write very well. Okay, I do understand. Recklessly, he has to say that's on his mind. I have to. His wife is there, his biggest fan. That's just kind of a random insert. I didn't really get it. It sort of broke the momentum of the paragraph. His biggest fan, always his first reader, making polite comments. It's good she's polite, I guess. Are you saying that there's no substance? Are you saying that they didn't feel comfortable speaking with you and it was sort of reduced to this superficial level of human conversation? I don't understand. You don't care. Maybe nobody writes about you, I say, because you don't write very well. So they were talking about why Sanderson's apparently writerly, the whole size of Utah in the writerly world, he's unknown. And apparently Sanderson agrees somewhat, which is strange. I think he's probably the most. But he also claimed that Sanderson says that he's the most popular. Blah, blah, blah. Where's that? Topping bestseller list for the better parts of the 21st century. By Sanderson's estimation, he's the highest selling author. Okay, highest selling author. I guess that doesn't necessarily mean most renowned. And then when I eventually meet him in person, makes excuses for his writerly obscurity. Okay, so I'm the highest selling, but I'm kind of obscure. I don't know why. And then he's excited to talk about his reputation. So he has a reputation, or talk about his lack thereof, I suppose. The world unfreezes. He agrees. So he agrees he's not the best writer. It's not that Brandon Sanderson can't write. It's more that he can't not write. I see the transition there. Very clever. Graphomania is the name of the condition. The constant compulsion to get words out, down, as much and as quickly as possible. The concept of a vacation confuses Sanderson, he once said, because for him, the perfect vacation is more time to write. Vocation as vacation. That's nice. His schedule is budgeted down to the minute, months out. That makes him seem a little bit insane, and I'm sure if it's scheduled down to the minute, budgeted down to the minute, I'm sure it includes, like, healthy things, like family and whatever. His schedule is budgeted down to the minute, months out, to maximize the time he spends, rather counter-ergonomically, on the couch, typing away. That is counter-ergonomic. I would hate that. I actually like standing when I write. Most days, he wakes up at 1 p.m., exercises, and writes for 4 hours. Breaks for the wife and kids. Then he writes for 4 more. After that, he plays video games or whatever until 5 a.m. A powerful sleeping pill is all that works, finally, to get him and the voices in his head to shut up. Okay. I don't think that's necessarily the healthiest lifestyle. I don't particularly do that myself. I do struggle with late nights and late mornings, and it's something I'm trying to sort of tend away from. I think creative sorts obviously end up being a lot more chaotic, unstructured whenever they have inspiration, whenever they're feeling that flow. They just try to get words out, words or whatever sort of creative, blah, blah, blah. So it is common with creative sorts. Hans Zimmer, I think, said he starts work at like 9 p.m. and finishes at 5. So maybe it's not the healthiest, but why? I just don't really understand. I don't really understand. A powerful sleeping pill is all that works finally to get him and the voices in his head to shut up. Perhaps that's what Sanderson himself has said. He says things like that in public, and he embraces his life and his identity and his truth and the value that comes from it, and he's fairly open regarding how he struggles or fails to struggle, the trauma that he has or has not endured, where he gets the inspiration for the various forms of suffering and PTSD and blah, blah, blah that he explores in his books. He's a fairly open guy, and I think he seems to embrace wholeheartedly the exploration of the world and, bettering himself. And I suppose Sanderson might have said that, and it could be something interesting to put down. But again, I just don't really get the point. It just seems kind of needlessly jabbing. In the 5 months or so it has taken me, Jason, to sit down and write this magazine story, that's a while, which is 4,000 words long. Sanderson has published 2 books. During the COVID lockdowns, he wrote and or edited 7. 2 for his regular publisher, a graphic novel, and 4 more in secret, telling no one but his wife, until he surprise announced a Kickstarter in March 2022 to crowdfund their publication. Hence the 42 mil raised in a month, by far the most successful Kickstarter ever. Since his debut, Elantris, in 2005, he's published 30-plus books, the biggest ones in excess of 400,000 words, far more if you count novellas and graphic novels. I've read 17, or maybe it's 20. Exactitude is pointless here, as the major books are all set in the same universe, which Sanderson calls the Cosmere. They're all but meant to blur together. That's just a strange thing to say. I'm not sure really what that means. With regards to counting the number of books, I suppose that's even right. I don't personally really count books. I'm not even the best with remembering titles, remembering character names. Certainly not chapter. I'm not one of these people that's like, oh, I'm on chapter 4. I just kind of read. So I suppose he's right. They are sort of meant to blur together in the sense that it's all one overarching story and world. And, if you relate to the characters and their journeys, you don't really need to pay attention to the punctuated, publication delineations. But that was said sort of somewhat condescendingly. They're all but meant to blur together. Again, you just don't really get the point. When Most will hear this and think, at that rate, none of the words could possibly be any good. They'd be right, in a way. And that's what Sanderson agrees with. Okay, so this is like, he's sort of just voicing Sanderson's own thoughts. He's not being very extremely obviously insulting, I suppose. At the sentence level, he's no great gift to English prose. Yeah, I agree. Although I think he's more capable than his books reflect. When you see like some of the newspaper cutouts or whatever headlines in the Wax and Wayne series and whatnot, he's clearly capable of more eloquent writing. The early books especially, my God. Here's a sample sentence. It was going to be very bad this time. Okay, you cannot take that as a sample sentence in isolation and suggest that it reflects bad prose. It depends extremely heavily on the context, who's thinking it, what sort of character they are, what's going on. Like, you could say something extremely flowery and it could utterly ruin the momentum and pace and dramatic bluntness of the moment. Another one, she felt a feeling of dread. Yeah, that's not so good. There's a penchant for redundant description. A city is tranquil, peaceful, quiet, peaceful. Many things, from buildings to beasts, are enormous. Dark places, more thesaurically, are colliginous. On almost every page of Mistborn, his first and probably most beloved series, a character sighs, frowns, raises an eyebrow, cocks a head, shrugs, or snorts. Sometimes at the same time, sometimes multiple times a page. I count 7 books in which one of the characters frets about their metaphors. Yeah, I noticed that. I have trouble with metaphors, one literally says. Of his own work, Sanderson has said, I detest rewriting. Great, good for him. People love it. It's made him the most successful. Amazing. I write for endings, he said. Yes, amazing endings, amazing timing, amazing everything brought together, all the threads into a gloriously timed, suspenseful and surprising climax. It's great, you know, just enough to be invested in everything going on and just not enough to be surprised when something's revealed. I did have some quibbles with Oathbringer and Rhythm of War, especially Rhythm of War. And I write to relax. It shows. He writes, by one metric, at a 6th grade reading level. Okay. Here's where I'll stop using Sanderson's words. Okay, written or spoken against him. It's not fair. Well, if it's Sanderson's words, I'm sure he'd embrace them. I'm sure he's got no qualms about that. If it's Sanderson's words, I'm sure he'd embrace this. Probably mostly things he said in public, unless there was the suggestion that you were speaking in private, respectfully, personally, and that you weren't going to use them, because then, in that case, it's not fair. He's simply not, I'll say it again, very quotable. Again, I'm just not very sure what that means. What was the purpose? Like, you went over to Utah with the purpose of exploring what, exactly? What did you want to quote? I spent days with the man. I watched his YouTube videos, made a dent in his podcast empire, most of it incredibly about writing. Not sure what that means. Like his books, it all blurs together. I typed some 40 pages of notes for this story, and who knows how many pages of transcripts the AI spat out when I fed it the many hours of recorded audio. Now that I'm writing, I find I'm referring to none of it. Possibly, this is the influence of Sanderson himself on me. Possibly it's because there doesn't seem to be anything of substance developing in this article. Like, I'm sure he said many interesting, fascinating things about his process, although I suppose some authors can get tired of talking about that, about trauma, suffering, philosophical beliefs, the way in which he finds inspiration, the way in which he challenges his beliefs, the way in which he develops his characters, the way he relates to his fans, how writing and fame have affected his life, where he sees himself in the future, what's meaningful to him about all of this. There's probably, hopefully, if there was good conversation, stuff about that, but instead this article just seems to kind of describe a strange sense of listless unfulfillment you are experiencing, Jason, in writing this article. I guess I'm getting a bit personal saying you and Jason. So, the ideas. Let's focus on the ideas. Graphomaniacally get thoughts down, have fun, wait for the ending. So I will. This story has an ending, I promise, and I'm sprinting towards it as if to a vacation. Like the best of Sanderson's endings, my ending should surprise you. Because, you see, Sanderson actually did say one thing to me, one miraculous thing that stuck, that I remember these 5 months later with perfect clarity. Just 7 words, but true ones. Patrick Rothfuss. 7 words. You're not ready. I think he's in love with Sanderson. You're not ready for them just yet. Is that 7 words? No. You need more story first. For now, there's only Sanderson, both wordful and wordless. Nice. The best-selling writer no writer writes about because writers only know how to talk about words. Interesting. Sanderson's readers, loving, legion, care about something else. That's interesting. I don't think I noticed that the first time I went through this article, and that's actually somewhat complimentary and kind of has a nice flow to it. The best-selling writer no writer writes about because writers only know how to talk about words. Sanderson, hopefully not. Sanderson's readers loving Legion care about something else. Nice, let's see what that thing is. 10 seconds to go until the launch. The lights are flashing, the music thumping. This is sick, someone whispers behind me, as a Cosmere's worth of nerds count down the remaining seconds. At 0, an enormous applause. Then the VP of Merchandising and Events walks out. Not sure what that's supposed to convey. If it's supposed to convey some sense of letdown or commercialization. This is Dragonsteel 2022, the second annual convention for Sanderson's Worlds and Works. At the first one, the year before, 1,200 fans showed up. At this event, a 2-dayer in November, attendance is closer to 5,000. Even though the con is being held in the biggest venue in downtown Salt Lake City, the Salt Palace Convention Center, fans are turned away from stuff. The Dragonsteel planners will need to think bigger. Good, so it's growing, it's growing, it's growing. Seems nice. For now, the fans, even the turned away ones, are in unconquerable spirits. As is typically the case at these things, there's a general air, warmish, body-odored, nice, of unself-consciousness. Great! That's humanity, isn't it? That's every single ritual and coming together we have of the things that break down the barriers between us and challenge us to connect with some subconscious fabric of transcendent experience that unites us all and that reminds us, that resonates through us and reminds us of our shared humanity, whatever that means deep down there that we don't understand, but which moves us in concerts and poetry and story and film and sport and yes, great. I'm not inclined to believe it because I wasn't there, but by my rough count, some 3/4 of the attendees are men, boys, blurring together in a mass of pale, fleshy nerdery. Nice. Insult the nerds for having pale skin. Whatever, it's fine. In Sanderson-appropriate graphic tees. Again, why? The women, fewer in number, tend to be the better cosplayers. Typical. Great. Lots of billowing cloaks, sprightly makeups, precious weapons. Precious weapons? There's an arena for refereed fights, really. If you don't come prepared, never fear, because the sprawl of purchasable Sandersonalia is endless. Art, clothes, blah, 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 blah. I talk to as many of the fans as I can, some in their teens, others in their 60s, from here in Utah and as far away as India, Norway, Australia. They're sweet. Many of them have been reading Sanderson since the beginning, since Elantris. A teenage girl announces, "I'm here basically because I'm a huge nerd." Everyone is smiling, sharing info and panel gossip. I'm here basically because I'm a huge nerd. I don't get it. One guy from Massachusetts tells me he just spent $170 on a rubber sword. Wow. For a rubber sword? This one is called Myelaran. It's bigger than he is. Ah, nice. He won't be able to take it on the plane home. Is that what he's telling you? As if I'm sure he's going to ship it. Is he like bemused at his wit's end, or are you at your wit's end regarding the purpose of the thing? Okay, let's see. Where was I? I got interrupted. Sword, bigger than he is, shipping it home. Another guy, 41 years old, tells me that he made his sword Firestorm. They all have names. Himself. Again, the thing said with this sort of attitude, it just seems not vaguely, it seems overtly or at least somewhat directly condescending, and yet it's not clear exactly why. They all have names. Like, they're so nerdy, they name their swords, but not only some of them, all of them, I suppose, would be the interpretation. Again, I just don't really understand the implication. I don't really think it strikes at anything particularly meaningful. It just seems like he's vaguely out of place in this environment, and you wonder why he went there. It took more than a year on and off to design, and then 6 weeks to 3D print. Wow. I see a young couple with very young kids. Are you indoctrinating them into this fantasy land? I ask. So he kind of takes like an antagonistic approach, asking, maybe it's because you're not a good writer, Sando. Maybe it's because da-da-da-da. Are you indoctrinating them into this fantasy land? Gesturing to the stroller. Trying to, the dad says. Okay. Another rather pointless interaction. I just don't really get the purpose. The one question I ask practically everyone is, why Sanderson? I only need to ask it a few times to realize the answer is always the same. It's a two-parter. First part, Sanderson's characters. They feel like real people, everyone insists. Insists, is that supposed to imply that they're wrong? I'm not sure. So he claims that he read, 17 to 20 of these books. Again, I just haven't really seen anything which reflects actual appreciation of, or commentary on, forget appreciation of the work itself, of the story. And so he's kind of just, passing along these comments from fans without giving any sort of judgment or commentary, much less judgment or commentary. I mean, he's passing it along in a vaguely derisive way, but without giving any sort of actually meaty judgment commentary, much less commentary connected to his actual exposure to and or experience of the books. Multiple parents say they've named their kids after their favorites, usually the princely protagonists who've overcome various depressions and triumphed chivalrously, I would typically have said. I've done some things I'm not proud of, one man tells me. Then he read the first Stormlight book, The Way of Kings, and now, reformed, he has a 2-year son named Kaladin. That's very interesting. I've done some things not proud of. I would have loved to hear that story, but instead it just seems to lead to the fact that he named his son Kaladin, which isn't something I would do, especially not with these more exotic names like Daenerys or Kaladin that people do, but Khaleesi. But, okay. The second answer to why Sanderson is his worlds. Yes, this is probably what he's best known for. World building, as it's called. Sanderson dreams up far-off lands, sometimes cities, sometimes whole planets, with rules and systems and politics. Fancy that. Then he populates them with characters whose fates are also the worlds'. There's probably an interesting discussion to be had there. He does, I think, tend to, create characters out of very strong kind of elemental symbolism, like, the edge dancers, the wind runners, the such and such. They all represent, I guess, specific beliefs or specific attitudes one might take towards life. And I don't know if it's necessarily connected to the world, but it can, in a broader sense, be connected to the races and the various powers at war across a world. It can probably reflect, I don't know, I do think he tends to symbolize, that probably just wasn't the best example. It's because I don't think it's really true. The characters whose fates are also the world's. It's probably an interesting discussion to be had there, but I'm not sure exactly what it means. Mistborn might be the world, I suppose, in which the magic system and the way the characters relate to it most reflects something about the final conclusion where he becomes a god and all that. Not sure. Some characters die. So the second answer is just the inverse of the first. You can't have world building without character building. Not sure what that means. Some characters die, some become gods. The good ones, and most of them are good, are very good. Inspiringly good. No one has sex. They only save lives. Okay, he means that sense of good. I was going to say this is actually somewhat positive, but the good ones, and most of them are good, are very good. Inspiringly good. No one has sex. They only save lives. The sex thing, I mean, he tends to do the sort of like fade away thing. A lot of authors do. I think it's fairly common, especially because he does appeal to a younger audience as well. And they only save lives. That's just such a false, shallow, wrong. That's just a completely wrong reading of Sanderson. Yeah, he's not grimdark. He's not gritty in the same way exactly as Martin. He probably doesn't have as nuanced an approach to... He doesn't have as nuanced an approach in many ways to the possible motivations for people or the chaos of... I think, like, Martin's world is very chaotic in the sense that there's all sorts of gods and powers you only vaguely understand that come into it in bits and pieces, and then there's the cultures, religions, mentalities that those forces produce, and then there's the people with all their individual family stuff, and they all kind of... Sometimes they do random things, sometimes they do ambitious things. It's a world defined very much by... bold, ambitious acts, all from every which direction, every which way that have unintended consequences. Sanderson's is probably a little bit more clean and structured in the sense that, it's not grimdark, it's not as gritty. Probably more clean and structured in the sense that the evil people do and the weaknesses they have does tend to follow kind of a continuous stream of the story. Like, it usually seems focused upon or aimed at the same overarching conflict that's dominating the world. People do tend to fall into sides a bit more cleanly, but not cleanly, not like Tolkien or whatever, certainly. I think the characterization of them as very good, inspiringly good, they only save lives, it's just very strange. Like Kaladin, obviously Dalinar, Moash, Jasna, Shallan. Even Shallan does crazy things. Everyone, Renarin, like all of them. Some of them are, you could describe as slightly more victimly than others, like they're sort of unfortunate victims of their circumstances, and then they're imbued with this power or impulses that they don't quite know. Seth, that they don't quite know what to do with. Some are a bit more malicious in the sense that they kind of put themselves in these situations. Taravangian. But the description of them as only good is just completely wrong. Completely wrong. What nobody, not a single person complains about in my 2 days walking the palace floors is Sanderson's writing. If they mention his sentences at all, it's merely to acknowledge that they're easier to read than, say, Tolkien's, whose work they may well graduate to, with Sanderson lighting the way. Possibly, yeah. Many people also graduate from kind of more classic, at least in my day. I think perhaps because of how I grew up, a bit less connected to the internet and blah, 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 a bit more focused on older classic literature, myths, legends, Tolkien, Narnia, and I sort of graduated from there to modern fantasy. Maybe that's changing nowadays. I think there's a vast, vast population of people who were introduced to fantasy through other means, more modern fantasy, gaming, other sorts of things, and so they probably will graduate towards Tolkien for different reasons in a different sort of progression. So that's fair. With Sanderson lighting the way, blah, blah, blah. Yes, I think many of his fans probably don't talk about his writing that much because there's nothing to rave about, meaning his prose. Sanderson himself admits he was late to Tolkien, in whose shadow he now happily lives, even as he tries to write beyond it. Again, is that supposed to be Sanderson's own sentiment? Because if so, then that's great. Fine. If it's yours, are you trying to insult him? I don't know. Still, can't help but try to trip them up. So this guy just prioritizes writing. You have to be an excellent writer. And there's this vast mystery surrounding anyone who can't write actual poetic, flowery, non-repetitive, sophisticated, elaborate, complex prose. Anyone who can't do that and who's successful and popular and who tells profound stories and philosophies and has lots of people enjoying and finding meaningful what they're doing, that's a mystery. It's undeserved somehow. It's a strange phenomenon in society that must be recognized and cured. Is that the point of this article? Sanderson, I can't help but try to trip them up. Nice. Nice. Surely he's not a great writer, I prod. Now there's emphasis on the great, which I don't really get. Surely he's not a great writer, I would understand. Or surely his prose isn't great, but surely he's not a great writer. Don't really get that. I prod. Polite, embarrassed smiles. That would sort of be the natural response. I wouldn't quite know what to say, unless I got into a conversation with this guy, in which case I'd hope he'd give a few more of my complicated thoughts instead of just, oh, he smiled politely. They're suspicious of me, I can tell. Depending on the way you ask the question, that would seem suspicious. They probably think I don't know my Kaladin from my Adolin. I do. I even like Kaladin. Okay, there's something about an actual story written by Sanderson that he said. First time, right? The scene midway through Way of Kings where Kaladin talks to a mysterious stranger. It's Hoid on the Shattered Plains. A story doesn't live until it's imagined in someone's mind. See, this seems vaguely complimentary. It seems to be building towards something meaningful, Hoid says. Do I know what he means? Not exactly. And that's exactly why I read science fiction and fantasy. Why I've pretty much only read science fiction and fantasy my entire life. Okay. Maybe I spoke too quickly, maybe I judged too quickly at the beginning. For those plays at profundity, and maybe people who read his stuff know this about him. For those plays at profundity, at the essence of storytelling. Yes, well said. Storytelling beyond words. Well said, and that's what Sanderson is. That's why his fans like him. Okay, that was a bit better. But what am I saying? Gibberish, most likely. And you undercut it. Not sure. I mean, unless we're going to get into philosophy and analyze the rationality and the mathematics of life, we are going to make symbols and draw parallels and have metaphors and tell stories and myth, and that's why these things can be talked about endlessly, and that's why no one knows exactly what they mean, and that's why it's a bit frustrating, but we endlessly fail to pin them down with rationality. And it's more kind of this converging of experience, which you then study and attempt to learn rationalistically from, only to dive back into experience with a new hopefully a new psychological perspective, and then see how that affects and it's kind of this thing. Sanderson is a bad writer, I've already said it. Here at the convention, most of the panelists aren't even writers. People don't care about sentences. Yeah, that is something we could lament somewhat in the modern day. They care about Sanderson. That's great. I don't see a problem with that. I sit through multiple panels about the future of his publishing company, which is called, as is the convention, you'll note, Dragonsteel. Not sure why noting that is... It's just publicity. Is that bad? Post Kickstarter campaign, the company is now 50 some people, Mormons strong. This is the year of Sanderson, the panelists keep saying. 4 new books with special swag for backers, new toys and sparkly bookmarks. Now they're talking about warehouse expansion efforts. So now he's just kind of making fun of success or the commercialization of merchandise warehouses. Now they're talking about a possible future bookstore housed in a castle or something. As if it's bizarre or strange or unrealistic. When will the Dragonsteel amusement park be built? Someone asks. The audience hoots. Whenever you say hoots, it's condescending. All this, I think to myself, is not the spirit of fantasy. Is he going to say something interesting? If it's world building, it's only world building one thing. The world builder's world. Okay. Just because he's making money. I mean, he's making money, and then he's using the money to expand what all the people love, and then more people love it, and then they keep buying the books and enjoying the stories, and then expand it more. Also, he can create this structure of incredible story experience and engagement, and he's clearly a guy who loves to write. I mean, he spends all his time writing. He puts out books constantly. It's not like, is Brandon Sanderson becoming corrupted and turning into a hedonistic tyrant? I don't understand. I don't understand. This is people choosing voluntarily to celebrate this world and this thing. Are they being tricked? If they're being tricked, explain how. Explain what in the culture of Sandersonian fans we need to realize. 3 days later, I pull up to Sanderson's built world, his homes, in a gated community of American Fork, Utah. There are 3 properties. On the left is the newest one, the subterranean man cave, unofficially known as the Supervillain Lair, officially the Ammonite Club, complete with a 28-seat industry-caliber movie theater. The middle structure is the Sanderson family manor, where his 3 boys play. Nice. Good. On the right is the Cosmere House, which serves as Dragonsteel's HQ. Props and merch and books for days. That's where I'm staying. Specifically in the Elantris suite. It has cover art from the books on the walls, gold and silver frilly things everywhere, and the world's best shower. That doesn't seem particularly bad. He just likes his world, or whoever built these things likes his world. I already knew about the shower because a few nights earlier I'd gone out for drinks with a friend of Sanderson's I met at the con. After contextualizing his success for me, basically he gives fans exactly what they want, she insisted I stay a night in the Elantris suite. Basically he gives fans exactly what they want. Is that supposed to be a summary of her opinion, or your interpretation of what she said? Or is that supposed to be bad or good? And you have to try the shower, she said. I'll text him. The next morning I woke up to an invitation from his assistant. Sanderson's assistant is his wife's sister. As I orient myself within the Cosmere house, I keep running into his nearest and dearest, his doppelganger brother, multiple siblings-in-law, neighbors, people's children, friends Sanderson formed a writers group with almost 30 years ago, back in college at Brigham Young University, when he was a nobody and worked the graveyard shift at a hotel so he could write the nights away. Dragonsteel is a company, one that's shaking up the book industry. It's also Sanderson's extended family. That could be read with a positive or a negative slant. Could be kind of like fond and hopeful. It could be kind of, conspiratorial. The writers group still meets every Friday, which is what today happens to be. It's the most PG gathering of writers. I shouldn't read everything with a negative sort of tone, because then when it actually is negative, it just seems to fit in with the rest of my general vibe. So I should read everything neutrally and then analyze it objectively. It's the most PG gathering of writer types I've ever been to. See, that just seems needless. What is it supposed to suggest? There are chips and sodas. Yep, Mormons. Someone's baked an apple crisp. Nice. Before the meeting kicks off, I corner some regulars in the kitchen. They're gossiping, cracking jokes. One, Dragonsteel's new head of narrative. When you say something like that without context, it does just have an immediately derogatory slant, like, oh look, he's inventing useless jobs for people he cares about, which is fine. It's fantastic. That's just his choice. Let's slip, unless you feel like it's a useless product. Let's slip that Sanderson feels no pain. Let's slip that Sanderson feels no pain. It's true, Sanderson's sister-in-law says. Even though he writes for 8 hours a day on the couch, he has no backaches. The hottest of hot sauces cause scarcely a sweat. At the dentist, he refuses Novocaine for fillings. When I ask Sanderson later to confirm this, he does, but asks if I really have to print it. I'm sorry, I say. I really do. That's just flatly unexplained. The writers' group is standard. See, I wish we could see something actually into the person and the personal desires and opinions and convictions expressed, but it's all kind of just this flat veneer of. It feels like this guy is trying to communicate to us that he went in there into this community of interconnected, passionate, convicted people, and he just kind of tried to pick away at them and find weaknesses. To what end? Because he's dissatisfied with Sanderson's success, because Sanderson's prose is simple. That's the best I can do so far. And it doesn't seem like there's much effort to understand the value, except for that little bit about liking Kaladin, which would have been strange if he didn't include anything. The writer's group is standard stuff. What's this character's motivation? Can the reader follow that fight sequence? Good. Sanderson gives feedback with half his brain, the other half occupied with autographing books. Again, needlessly negative. Autographing can be completely rote. I've autographed many books. It's only afterward that the real talk happens, such as Star Wars debates. When those subside, I bring up the pain thing again. Nice. Turns out Sanderson doesn't seem to feel pain of any kind, even emotional. I doubt that's true, because he writes emotions. On roller, I guess you could, supposedly. An AI could probably churn out a pretty emotional. But I doubt that's true. On roller coasters, he's dead-faced while his wife is shrieking. It's sick and wrong, she says, smiling. She likes to say she married an android. For his part, Sanderson actually, at this moment, looks pained. He might not feel, he says, but his characters do. Did he say that? I might not feel, but my characters do. And again, you have to see the context. Verbal, whatever, transliterating from verbal to text is always wont to produce misinterpretations, and those can be slanted and used. And if he doesn't feel, then great exercise to write characters. What better thing could you do, really, than write characters that feel? If you were cursed with an inability to feel, they agonize and cry and rejoice in love. That's one of the reasons he writes, he says, to feel human. The conversation eventually turns to a theme park called Evermore, located just down the street. Though unaffiliated with Sanderson, it's Sandersonian to the core. You show up, hang around taverns, and embark on quests. We have to go, I say. But it's falling apart, everyone groans. Something to do with bad management. There's a 4-hour YouTube video all about it. Still, Sanderson seems tempted. We leave it at that. I go back to the Elantris suite, where I finally take that shower. There are multiple shower heads. I turn everything on. Water hits me from every angle. I don't cry, but I could. It's bad or what? I do cry the next night. Oh, my last in Utah. We're down in Sanderson's below-ground movie theater, in plush red leather seats that not only recline but also have adjustable headrests. He wants to show the specs off, so he plays the opening scene of The Greatest Showman. I don't tell him that, while I like musicals, I hate The Greatest Showman, and especially Hugh Jackman. The scene starts. The chair shakes with otherworldly sound. When Hugh, lame Hugh, opens his mouth to sing, I can't help it. I burst into tears. I don't know. I don't know what that's supposed to mean. I don't know how it fits in. I don't know if it's supposed to draw pity or generate disdain for The Greatest Showman in the movie theater or what. What's happening to me? The story isn't coming together. Okay, maybe we'll get something here. This story isn't coming together. To my mind, I still haven't gotten anything real from Sanderson, anything true. I don't know what that means. To my mind, thus far in the article, I haven't gotten anything real or true. I don't see how it reflects something. I don't see how it reflects a sort of developing opinion about anything to do with Sanderson or fantasy or the culture or what anything he's trying to say. It's just kind of like a string of observations with some petty jabbing witticisms and a general sense of unfulfillment. I'm not the first person he's toured around his lair to politely gawk at his treasures and trophies, and his hallway of custom stained glass renditions of his favorite books, Tolkien, Harry Potter, the Belgariad. Ah, that's really cool. I'm certainly not the first person he has told about one favorite book in particular, Barbara Hambley's Dragon's Bane, which an English teacher put in his hands when he was 14, probably the day he became a fantasy writer, or how he got first published, or about the phone call he got from Robert Jordan's widow, asking if he might finish the Wheel of Time series. Imagine that. Imagine, that would be insane. These stories are all, and I think he finished it up better than Jordan could have. I know that's a controversial opinion. I think so. I think the only books I've read multiple times would be like the last 3 and probably the first 2. Again, I wasn't reading too much these years. What is this? What is he listing? I'm certainly not the first person he's told about these things. Okay. These stories are all over the internet, on his website and many others. So he's wanting something more deeper. He's wanting, why are you successful despite having bad prose? Or he's wanting, why do you write such compelling characters despite not feeling pain? I just don't get it. I don't get it. And I don't think these things really correlate with Sanderson's true values or self or expressions in public either. Sanderson has lived so much of his life and fame openly. Yes, self-promotionally, depending on what you mean. It's a major reason for his success. One woman I talked to at the con made sure to tell me which of Sanderson's pets was her favorite. It's Jello, the parrot. So just people obsess over him too much? People aren't appreciating true literature? I don't get it. After I recover from Hugh in 4D, Sanderson collects his 15-year-old and we all drive to dinner. This time the food is better. Utah Japanese. Nice. Little jab. Sanderson and I order ramen. He salts his. Then I watch his son salt his yakisoba. I could cry again. I'm sorry, that just seems like pretentious or strange. Or, yeah. Instead, I ask Sanderson if he's ever so moved by a scene he writes that he cries. Sometimes, he says, so he does feel. Though it might not... I said that. He didn't say that. Sometimes, he says, though it might not be the scenes people expect. That's pretty common for writers, I think, and for most things like that. He won't say more, but it's something. This conversation from 5 months ago, remember, I recall fairly clearly. We're heading towards something now, some kind of admission. I can feel it. When Mormons ask God for a sign, they speak of a burning in the bosom. Say you're a kid wondering if you should be a fantasy writer when you grow up. You might ask God what he thinks. If there's a burning in your bosom, that's probably a yes. So I press Sanderson on the moments he's felt the burning. He says they're too intimate, too special to talk about. That's fine. And let's talk about Mormonism in another way. Let's talk about it as it relates to fantasy. Because it's no secret. Mormonism is the fantasy of religion. The science fiction edition of Christianity, I've heard it called, with its angels and alternative histories, embodied gods, visions and plates of gold. I ask Sanderson if I've got the ultimate promise of the religion right. The ultimate promise being, as I understand it, that we humans will, if we're good and marry well, and memorize the passcodes, eventually pass into the highest kingdom, and come into our divine inheritance. We'll become gods, in other words, and get our own planets. Sanderson doesn't balk at the characterization. He agrees that's the gist, and he knows where I'm going. Okay, so I'm curious, first of all, if he phrased it in that exact way. The ultimate promise of being is that we will, if we're good and marry well and memorize the passcodes, eventually pass into the highest kingdom and come into our divine inheritance. We'll become gods, in other words, and get our own planets. I wonder if that's as he phrased it. And first of all, these sorts of things in religion in general, especially to a philosophical mind, to someone who's like, well, it depends what you mean by this and this and this, the sorts of things that infuriate probably more mathematically or practically or rationalistically minded people, or sorts of people who, when they ask questions, they want an answer about you and your beliefs in relation to the general context of the culture and what everyone knows you're discussing, and then you give some answer like, well, it depends on what you mean by Jesus or real. I understand why that can be infuriating. And so probably he was being rather literalistic, and Sanderson perhaps was responding in kind and saying, yes, that's literally what he believes will happen. But also we know that he's a pretty serious thinker, that he weaves all these thoughts into his books in rather enjoyable ways. So a description like that, if we're good, marry well, memorize the passcodes, ignoring the strange condescension once again, eventually pass into the highest kingdom and come into our divine inheritance. That could mean almost anything. Like that could be pretty much any philosophy of religion simply stated with mythological language or with fantasy language, I suppose. He doesn't... Anyway, Anyway, I wonder what Sanderson would say about that. He doesn't balk at the characterization. He agrees that's the gist, and he knows where I'm going. He knows I want to know if what he's doing, writing fantasy books, is fundamentally in some way, some very central way, Mormon. Well, from a writer who supposedly enjoys fantasy and finds it, what did he say? Exploring the blah 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 of life. Let's look for it. All my life. Nope. Fantasy. Where was it? And that's exactly why I read science fiction and fantasy. Why I've pretty much only read science fiction and fantasy my entire life. For those plays at profundity, at the essence of storytelling. Storytelling beyond words. A story doesn't live until it's imagined in someone's mind. So he should appreciate that. But yeah, maybe he doesn't think it's literally true. Maybe there is some fundamental divide between the values and stuff we explore through symbol and how then it actually translates into mathematical life, material existence, whatever. He doesn't balk at the characterization. He agrees with the gist. Is it fundamentally Mormon? Of course it is, he says. The world building, the gods incarnate, the systems of magic. So much of Mormonism is about rules. So are his books, where miracles don't happen unless you put in the work. That's when, between mouthfuls of pork cutlet... Nice. This is the sort of thing you describe, like, if you're writing a book, writing a scene, like in a sort of James Herriot-esque style, trying to capture a moment in like a cozy cabin, a cozy cottage in the Highlands, in the Scottish Highlands, in the rain, after working with the sheep, dirty and cold, you come in and between mouthfuls of steaming pork cutlet and mulled wine, you recount the days, blah, blah, blah. You know, you can convey a sort of scene of camaraderie and fellowship and humanity. But when it's inserted like this, that's when, between mouthfuls of pork cutlet, Sanderson makes the connection between his work and the work of his Heavenly Father explicit. It just seems odd. Like, it seems like you're trying to do nothing except convey a slightly, like, vulnerable picture of someone. It's just strange. This is when he speaks the 7 words of truth, the only ones I'm certain he has never said in quite this way before. That's cleverly phrased, so it's kind of obscures his point. Is he trying to say that Sanderson doesn't say a lot of deep truth, or doesn't speak in a generally powerful way, or hasn't said these exact words, or he does speak truth but has never... It's kind of manipulative, I think. As I build books, Sanderson says, as I sit there, for once entirely enraptured, God builds people. That could be unpacked. Why is he enraptured? Is he enraptured because he's trying to paint it as kind of a, like, extreme, like, personality cult, like, oh, everyone loves Sanderson and he's trying to be the world builder of his world and he's trying to be his own god and the god of his world and he lives in these houses named after his worlds and all the fans don't realize how rich he is? And is it supposed to be that, like, oh, I'm enraptured because this guy is, like, equating himself to God? Or is it like, there's, like, the grain of creativity that makes him so famous, and despite the bad prose is blah, blah, blah. Is that the point? I don't think he's connecting anything. I think he's just kind of making generally negative statements and then leaving us to interpret them as we wish, because he doesn't want to come outright and draw connections that would probably be ridiculous in the end if his opinion is generally, as it seems, negative of Sanderson, regarding Sanderson. So much of Mormon, yeah, I mean, every author who has a strong ideology or strong worldview would probably say, you know, my writing, my life, my every action is, I try to make it a reflection of Buddhism, Christianity, truth, God, whatever, Mormonism. We descend on one final world. After dinner, it's time for Evermore, the rundown theme park. The night is misty and cold, caligulous. I remember one of Sanderson's friends saying the park is only open at night. To conceal the decay. Interesting. I believe it. As we walk around, Sanderson narrates, those are bad prosthetics. That's half a costume. Shouldn't there be more skeletons in this dungeon? At least the apple cider is good. Okay. But what exactly are we supposed to interpret about the scene going on here? He gets recognized by everybody. I guess that's inevitable when you go to a fantasy land with a fantasy legend who has literally just purchased a $5 million plot of land across the way for who knows what world-building reasons. Nice. Sanderson's son and I start keeping a silent tally. Every time a new fan walks over, we hold up fingers behind Sanderson's back. We quickly run out of fingers. That's terrible. Terrible. One girl says she wants to take Sanderson's writing class at BYU when she grows up. Terrible. A surprising number of guys ask for autographs. For my girlfriend. That's surprising because why? Lots of people have already finished the latest book, which came out like yesterday. Sanderson shines in these situations. That's nice. He's your god, but he's your friend too. He's unafraid to drop hints about future projects. He does this to me at certain points. Will they ever make a big movie version of one of your books? I ask him in the fairy garden. Sanderson makes meaningful noises. Even though your systems of magic seem unfilmably complex, more meaningful noises. First of all, regarding that, I don't think anything's really unfilmably complex nowadays. No. There's definitely certain phenomena that yeah. No, that sounded foolish. There's definitely certain structures of magic, certain styles of narration that fit much, much better into books, obviously. We're all very familiar with that. Anything with a lot of introspection, internal dialogue. Certain magic systems, I suppose, would probably... But I don't think there's anything particularly about Sanderson. A lot of his magic is very physical, like drink metal, do something, slow time, speed time, fly, slide around, shoot fire. Like, I don't think there's anything unfilmable particularly. There's a lot of magic. That's something I get tired of in Sanderson, is it can start to seem a little bit, to me, chaotic or over noisy, over inundated with things going on, mechanical celebration of the full mechanical complexity of a magic system at expense of kind of a narrowness of focus that might make certain scenes more compelling. But everything's been optioned, he says, but then things revert and discussions continue. I suspect there will be big announcements soon. There have to be. Sanderson is bigger than ever. A good writer? Who knows? Well, what do you mean by writer? What do you mean by writer? What was the point of all of this? What I do know now is this. So many of us mistake sentences for story. But story is the thing. Okay, things happening. Characters changing. Surprise endings. This seems like the conclusion of an entirely different article. As I drive back to the house, drop off the kid, and then stay in the car with Sanderson a bit longer, talking about life, talking about worlds, my ending takes shape. The surprise is that it was Sanderson's ending all along, the ending of his best books. A character becomes a god, and the god beholds his planet below. Until now, it seems like a fulfilling, satisfying, somewhat insightful... I mean, it's something that could have been said much more quickly, like prose doesn't convict and compel and move people deeply. Nowadays, people are losing appreciation for complex prose. There's so much more than that. It's characters and people. That's what we resonate with. We experience life through the eyes of a character in a narrative, playing out some journey, blah, 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 boom, boom, period. That's why Sanderson's so popular. So it feels like the ending to a vastly different article. Now he says, a character becomes a god and the god beholds his planet below. If Sanderson is a writer, that is all he is doing. He is living his fantasy of godhead on Earth. And that kind of reverts back to the general negativity that was prevalent throughout the entire article that didn't really seem to have a point, didn't really seem to have a foundation, didn't really seem to have a direction. It just seemed kind of disconnected to me. It seemed like kind of the recounting of a bunch of small, rather strange, hollow observations. I don't understand. Unless you can draw a mythological comparison and start to say, we are all meant to come to divinity. We are all meant to act out the god. We represent life's greatest essences and powers and personalities: anger, lust, nobility, truth, virtue, fatherhood, motherhood. We represent these things as gods, and then we tell stories about them, and then we walk out these stories, and that's how they see the world, and these concepts manifest themselves to us. Fundamentally, we perceive they are the ground out of which all concept arises, and so you cannot help but live your life in this way, and Sanderson is doing it successfully because all these people appreciate that despite the bad prose. There's something you could probably do there, but in the end, it doesn't seem to have much point to me. Yeah, I don't know. I don't really get it. The picture at the beginning is just good. It's just an awesome picture. Sanderson standing with nice, I don't know if it's mahogany or walnut, but beautiful dark wood panels, kind of a ornate, what are they called? Lamps on the wall. But what are those called specifically? Kind of nice deep red curtains, and he's standing there with a sword, and he looks confident, and honestly, I don't know. The thing is, you're not going to be able to change the fan base's opinion. Like all this general stone slinging, stone tossing, whatever. Again, I don't want to be too hard. I don't want to be too judgmental, as if I can divine Jason's purpose. But it just didn't feel like it had a huge point. And Sanderson, like, the proof is in the pudding. He's written all of this stuff. He has millions and millions of fans. They've listened to him. He has hundreds of hours of himself speaking on the YouTube. Everyone knows how he is, and everyone loves him, and everyone's convinced. Yeah, he has flaws as a writer. He's definitely grown. His prose struggled more at the beginning. He sort of polished it up. People have certain criticisms regarding his beliefs, or how maybe his beliefs reflected in his story too strongly. Maybe he needs to have a broader appreciation for certain other beliefs and perspectives. Blah, blah, blah. But that's what writing is you write your perspectives as you can understand them. You try to challenge them if you're a good writer, as you can understand the challenges to them, and then you get feedback and you grow and you grow and you grow. And he still has many years of writing left, and he's already put out so much, and he's successful because of it. And so you're not going to change that. You can't possibly catch up with, overwhelm and change the culture of an audience with something like this that honestly just doesn't seem to have that deep of an understanding of the man and the reasons he's popular. It didn't seem to really reflect anything particular at all. It just said, I like Kaladin, I really do. What did it say? I even like Kaladin, the scene midway through Way of Kings, where Kaladin talks to a mysterious stranger. It's Hoid on the Shattered Plains. A story doesn't live until it's imagined in someone's mind. So he really likes that scene, apparently. It's just, that's the only glimpse of actual substance, actual connection to the story. I don't get the feeling that he's very familiar with Sanderson's works, or I think that would have been woven in more with actual criticism and stuff, instead of like, oh, his son salts food and he wears graphic tees and the fans are embarrassed when you ask isn't he a bad writer. It's a bit strange. There were glimmers of things that could have been meaningful. A powerful sleeping pill is all that works finally to get him and the voices in his head to shut up. If that's what Sanderson said, and if he has thoughts about it and wants to share them, interesting. But nothing came of it. Possibly this is the influence of Sanderson himself on me. Graphomaniacally get thoughts down, have fun, write for the ending. Don't refer to notes. What's there? Sanderson's readers, legion. Loving, legion. Care about something else. See, like the end of various paragraphs hints at something that he wants to seem like he's going towards, but they seem totally disconnected, and they all just seem built off of these generally negative paragraphs that are kind of unfounded and untied, and the characters are only good, inspiringly good. No one has sex, they only save lives. Not true. Storytelling beyond words, great. Sounds good. If it's world building, it's only world building one thing, the world builder's world. That just seems to get absurd to me. The world's best shower, nice, blah, blah. Yeah, I just didn't really get it. The bursting into tears, I mean, I don't want to make fun of someone's emotional distress, so I probably won't say much. But it just seems odd. I can't really tell why we are being told that. I can't really understand the point of this article.